breaks my heart that, a lot of women don't have a lot of choice. They don't have the access to this information. Years and years and years ago, before I saw a Chinese doctor, when I was 19, I had really quite bad endometriosis and really bad IBS, which led me to find Chinese medicine. And he sort of explained at the start, because I presented all these symptoms to him, and he said, let me guess, you've got endometriosis and you've got IBS. And so he sort of explained that, from a TCM perspective, that, the digestion, if you've got IBS, if you've got a lot of stress, or if you're an emotional person, it's a great leeway, to be developing endometriosis, for example. Like these sort of, they tend to marry together in TCM, poor gut health and endometriosis. So, I mean, how can you explain that? And can you go into the nutrition side of things? So I was having raw foods, lots of salads, lots of smoothies, things like that. And look, everybody is different, but when I changed my diet considerably, I had warm cooked foods and herbs, and I slowed down my HIIT classes, went back to walking. Well, I didn't have any period pain. So changed my life entirely, which is hence the business. But can you explain that whole concept of lifestyle and the stomach and how that can lead into or contribute to a really, nasty cycle?
Totally. Well, gut health and menstrual health is so intrinsically linked. And from my experience now, it's quite rare for someone to have really, really poor menstrual health and have great gut health. They typically go hand in hand. If you're struggling with your period, it's often that digestive symptoms arise as well. And the experience you had of being told that you have endo and IBS, most of my endometriosis patients have also been told they have IBS. It's so common that these digestive issues are linked. And there's many reasons for that. So, when we think about it from a Chinese medicine perspective, we have to think, okay, where is this blood coming from? When we produce blood with our period, from a Chinese medicine perspective, we produce blood by the food and drink that we eat. And what we consume, we then turn into energy through the spleen. The spleen and stomach are like a melting pot, and that's like our digestive fire through a Chinese medicine perspective. So what we take in needs to be transformed by these organs, by our digestive health, to then become energy and fuel and blood for our body to function smoothly and optimally. So like what you experienced, if we're kind of eating a lot of foods that are really cold in nature, potentially a bit more difficult to digest, that can downregulate the functioning of our digestive system. So through a Chinese medicine perspective, our spleen and stomach really cop a beating, and their functioning really lowers because they really prefer warmth. Because try to cook a soup without turning the stove on. Nothing is really going to happen. We need that warmth for transformation. And even just in chemistry, we need warmth to have chemical reactions. And so we really need that oomph in our digestive system and our digestive fire. And so if we're noticing a lot of, we're eating a lot of those more cold foods or harder to digest foods, then the functioning of our digestive system become a bit more sluggish and more compromised. And then that can then lead into a whole host of other issues like bloating, like fluid retention, and from a Chinese medicine perspective, often a lot of dampness. So you might notice that your tongue is a bit more swollen. You might notice teeth marks on your tongue. You may even have things like cysts on your ovaries. You may notice a lot of profuse vaginal discharge, for example. There's lots of ways that things like dampness can show up in the menstrual cycle and in menstrual health and in our digestive system. And so when we think of it also from our period, the food and drink that we take in needs to actually be building up our uterine lining, our endometrial lining, because the lining goes through a big transformation each menstrual cycle. It's building up and becoming quite thick. And this is quite a big process for a whole lining of an organ to build each cycle and become rich and filled with blood, and then break down and shed as the period. And so it's where is this energy and these nutrients coming from to really build up and thicken up this lining. And that comes from our food, that comes from our nutrition, that comes from what we eat and what we consume. And so sometimes we can correlate it if someone is, skipping meals, potentially not having brekkie, under eating protein is a really big one. And just not having a lot of nutrient-dense foods, perhaps a lot of processed foods, we can notice that the lining can start to become thinner, and we can see that as like a thinner period. So the period might start to get shorter, or the actual volume of blood lost can become less. And for some people, they're like, great, my period is like, 2 days and then it's done. It's very quick and easy. But then that can start to progress more, and people are like, I'm not really bleeding much at all. So that's what we need to pay attention to, because that can indicate that you don't have those reserves to lose, because our body is always prioritizing things. And so, just in day-to-day survival, our menstrual cycle isn't necessary if we're in a threat situation. And that's what our body can perceive if we're not having enough, nutrients really coming in. Our body is like, okay, how do we delegate this so that we can stay alive and our, vital organs are continuing to function? And so if we're in that kind of state, our body is like, don't worry about losing blood with your period. We need that blood. And then so your period can get lighter and lighter, or your cycle can become longer. So you could go longer between having your period, because the body is like, don't worry about your period or ovulating. We've got bigger fish to fry. So when you change things like your eating habits, when you eat in a more calm way, when you try and get into your parasympathetic nervous system so that there's actually energy going to your digestive organs, you can extract your nutrients more easily, you can digest more easily.
Yep.
And that also helps to strengthen your stomach acid, that helps to strengthen your digestive enzymes, which from a Chinese medicine perspective is the spleen and stomach, and it is that fire that's heating up hot. So yeah, we need those two to be in good harmony together, so that we're able to extract our nutrients from our food easily, and that we can then use that for energy in our body, and then we can also divert it to ovulating and thickening up our lining and having a healthy period.
Exactly. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation about the digestive system, obviously, but it's a tough sell to say to a woman that smoothie each day is really not good for your menstrual cycle. I mean, it's a really tough sell to say that. But truth,
Yeah, and you can experiment, you can be like, for a lot of my patients, I'll recommend adding in some more warming herbs into their smoothies. So I'll say add in cinnamon, put grate a bunch of ginger into your smoothie so that you're getting that warming element, and have less frozen ingredients. So don't put in frozen bananas and heaps of frozen stuff. Don't put in ice. Have room temperature water in it. Like, there's things that you can do to tweak it so it's not so cold for your stomach. You can have apple cider vinegar before to help stimulate things. But you can experiment with your body. Like, you can really treat your menstrual cycle as this direct feedback and as this experiment. So you can say, well, what if I just try and make those tweaks with my smoothies and I'll see what happens? Or what if I try and have a warming cooked brekkie? Then what does my cycle do? And if it gets better, it's hard to ignore, and it's hard to go back to your old ways when you're like, okay, well, I have a say and influence over this.
Exactly. I mean, having warm cooked foods for every meal, you can see the difference in your body. You 100% can, but it's so inconvenient, and we live in such a fast-paced world. We don't have time cooking eggs, honestly, it's really fast. 2 minutes, it's super fast. But every day, and then for lunch and for dinner and our snacks, it's in the world we live in, it's not so feasible. So it's easier to ignore this option that might help your body. So it's a big risk, and they don't know the return, I guess. So, but yeah, warm cooked foods always, it makes a massive difference.
It makes a huge difference. And just in terms of even just blood flow, like if you drink a really warm, like chicken soup, like if you eat that, like how different do you feel in your body if you have a salad? Like, it's a totally different experience in your body. And obviously we have to take into account where people live in the world. Like, if you're living in a really tropical area, you can handle colder foods, of course, because we're the aim is to really be living in harmony with your environment. So if you live in a really cold area, you're naturally going to be more drawn to warming cooked foods.
Yeah.
If you live in a really tropical, gorgeous location, you're going to be having more fruits and things, and your body should be able to handle that because the outside temperature is so warm.
Yeah.
But if you're in a cold area, if you're rugging up to go outside, we need to be warming up inside to reflect what's going on in our environment.
Exactly.